Tell me about this hunter.
They say he uses a connection with animals to track his prey. And once you're on his list, there's only one way off.
What happened that day?
I stared death in the face, and for the first time, I saw my true self. There is an animal in each one of us.
Sony's Kraven the Hunter finds itself in the unfortunate position of being the end of a cinematic universe that never really got off the ground. It's a sad echo of last year's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which also faced a troubled production, plagued by reshoots and endless delays, before stumbling into theaters as the unceremonious conclusion of the DCEU.
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
At least Aquaman had the pedigree of a billion-dollar predecessor, a bankable star, and a proven director. It failed to live up to expectations, but Kraven can't even boast those advantages. Instead, it arrives burdened by the weight of a shared universe that was doomed from the start. The Sony Spider-Man Universe, or SSU if anyone's still bothering to call it that, has been a punchline for years.
Whatever the future holds, we'll be ready. And you know the best thing about the future, it hasn't happened yet.
Despite a lucrative deal with Marvel Studios allowing Spider-Man to thrive in the MCU, Sony's ill-conceived attempts to spin a villain-focused franchise out of the scraps left behind have been nothing short of embarrassing.
It's Morbin time.
Girl, shut the f up. You thought you ate that? Bitch,
Outside of Venom, every installment has been a critical and commercial flop, riddled with inept storytelling and a fundamental misunderstanding of its audience. Now, Kraven the Hunter arrives as the SSU's swan song, dragging its tattered reputation along for the ride. Kraven the Hunter is a film that constantly leaves you scratching your head. It follows Sergei Kravenov, a man destined to become the titular hunter. As a teenager, Sergei and his brother Dmitri are dragged out of their posh New York school by their abusive father Nikolai, a Russian gangster with a twisted worldview.
We are predators.
You serious?
Nikolai takes his boys to Africa, where lavish hunting trips double as lessons in domination and violence. During one of these expeditions, a tragic accident leaves Sergei mauled by a lion. Enter Calypso, a random young girl with a shamanic grandmother who inexplicably revives Sergei using some vague magical serum. This deus ex machina grants Sergei glowing gold eyes, superhuman abilities, heightened senses, incredible strength, agility, and an uncanny ability to climb things.
Ready? Go! A new record!
Fast forward 16 years and Sergei has embraced his animalistic powers, waging a one-man war on poachers, drug dealers, and criminals. Meanwhile, Dmitri has remained under Nikolai's control, embodying the archetype of the shunned weaker sibling, though he does possess the unique ability to mimic others. As Sergei hunts down his enemies, he crosses paths with an adult Calypso, whose purpose in the story feels more like a checkbox than a meaningful character arc. Adding to the chaos is the Rhino, another gangster with ambitions of toppling Nikolai's empire. To eliminate the nuisance of Sergei, he hires the Foreigner, a zealous Spider-Man villain with a vendetta against Kraven. What unfolds is a mismatch of conflicts, with Sergei's personal vendetta against his father colliding with a broader, more convoluted power struggle.
There is an animal in each one of us.
Don't you want to know why they call me the Rhino?
Kraven the Hunter is a far cry from a comic book accurate portrayal of its titular character. In the source material, Kraven is a selfish, ruthless trophy hunter, a man defined by his obsession with proving his superiority through violence against the animal kingdom. Here, he's reimagined as a noble animal lover, an awkward departure that aligns him closer to Tarzan than the cunning, dangerous Marvel villain fans recognize. Now, just because a film deviates from its comic origins doesn't automatically make it bad.
So you, make your own web fluid in your body?
I'd rather not talk about this.
Does it just come out of your wrists, or does it come out of anywhere else?
I have to make my own in a lab, and it's a hassle compared to what you got.
That sounds like a hassle, yeah.
The real question is whether this version of Kraven can stand on its own merits. Unfortunately, the answer is a resounding meh. While Aaron Taylor Johnson gets plenty of opportunities to flex his action hero muscles, Kraven as a character is bland, his moral crusade too sanitized to be compelling. Even the supposed fraught dynamics with his estranged father and brother are undercut by the revelation that he still regularly interacts with his family, robbing the tension of any weight. The supporting cast doesn't fare much better, with Ariana DeBose's Calypso suffering the most, delivering stiff, uninspired lines as a character so thinly developed she might as well not exist. In the comics, Calypso is a mystical sorceress, but here she's reduced to a lawyer who happens to carry a convenient potion or two. It's a baffling downgrade that adds nothing to the story and wasted DeBose's considerable talent. The central conflict between Kraven and his father Nikolai is dragged down by endless scenes of stilted exposition, made even worse by Russell Crowe's wildly over-the-top Russian accent.
Because you sent her away. She was weak. Sick in her mind.
I don't know what happened to the actor's prep here.
My son, we are predators.
This doesn't really hit any of the marks.
Crowe seems to be having the time of his life hamming it up, but the result is more comical than compelling. Meanwhile, whatever emotional connection is supposed to exist between Kraven and his brother Dimitri is non-existent, leaving their interactions cold and hollow. Then there's Alessandro Nivola's Rhino, who might just take the crown for the most over-the-top Marvel villain ever. Nivola gleefully chooses scenery in every scene he's in, spouting bizarre tangents and exuding a level of creepiness that's cartoonish. At one point, he even makes a completely inexplicable sound, something so strange it defies description.
The Kravenov hit failed.
Is the performance good? Not really, but it's undeniably entertaining in a train wreck sort of way, injecting some much needed absurdity and humor into an otherwise lifeless film.
What is that? What the fuck is that? What is that private pile?
As if one unmemorable villain wasn't enough, the film also introduces Christopher Abbott as the Foreigner. This character is an odd choice even by the SSU standards. When there's a wealth of Spider-Man villains to pick from, why choose one so obscure that even die-hard fans might struggle to remember him? His ability? Hypnotizing people by making eye contact, counting to 3 and shooting them from outside their field of vision, essentially just flanking with extra steps. The film never bothers to clarify how his powers work or what his purpose in the story is, leaving him as just another baffling piece of a convoluted plot. This lack of explanation or lazy attempt extends to nearly every superpowered character in the film. Why does Kraven have the ability to talk to animals? A potion did it. Why does Alessandro literally transform into a rhino? Some off-screen doctor, apparently. How does Calypso create these potions? We're never really told. And why does one secret character have the ability to hypnotize? Who knows? The film offers no answers, leaving its world-building in shambles. Kraven the Hunter doesn't just fail to capture the spirit of its comic counterpart. It struggles to tell a coherent story, riddled with plot holes, unanswered questions, and a complete lack of self-awareness. It's an incoherent mess, occasionally amusing in its absurdity, but ultimately just another nail in the coffin of the Sony Spider-Man Universe. Okay, so with our overview out of the way, let's dive into the plot before ending with our overarching review of where the film went wrong. Just a heads up, there's going to be spoilers, but I doubt anybody's going to care. Kraven the Hunter attempts to deliver a gritty, character-driven story, but ends up tangled in a mess of unfulfilled motivations, incoherent plot points, and shallow character arcs. So the film starts off with Sergei Kravenov, better known as Kraven, escaping a Russian prison after a brutal confrontation with crime boss Semyon Chorny. Kraven uses his animal-like instincts and combat skills to dispatch Chorny's goons before killing their leader, proving he's as deadly as the legend suggests. What legend, you might ask? The one we were just told existed.
И за кем охотимся?
На такие, как ты.
Охотник, это сказки.
Каждый сказки правда.
From the outset, the film's biggest problem is clear. While there's no shortage of action, the story lacks depth and focus. The narrative jumps back 16 years to show a young Sergei and his brother Dmitri in the shadow of their abusive father Nikolai. A mob boss with a warped sense of power, Nikolai takes the boys on a hunting expedition to toughen them up. This trip becomes a pivotal moment in Sergei's life when he's attacked by a lion and nearly killed. But of course, a drop of the magical serum from Calypso's grandmother alters his DNA, giving him heightened animal abilities. This moment sets the stage for Sergei's transformation, but the film glosses over the emotional and psychological toll of such a traumatic event. In the present day, Sergei, now operating under the moniker of Kraven the Hunter, has embraced his animalistic powers to wage a one-man war on criminals and poachers. His motivations are murky at best. Is he avenging his traumatic childhood, protecting the natural world, seeking redemption? The film never clarifies, leaving the character's purpose as vague as his interactions with his estranged family. He's a hunter that hunts. Stop asking any more questions. His brother Dmitri, now an adult, invites Kraven to his birthday party, but their reunion is short-lived as Nikolai's presence reignites old wounds. This family dynamic could have been the emotional core of the film, yet it's largely sidelined in favor of repetitive action sequences. As I mentioned earlier, Kraven's crusade brings him into conflict with another Spider-Man villain, Alexei Sitchevich, a mercenary-turned supervillain known as the Rhino. Alexei seeks to claim Nikolai's criminal empire for himself, but his motivations are as thinly sketched as everyone else's. It is shown that Nikolai had insulted him decades earlier, but for a guy that now has thick skin, it just reveals that he ironically has pretty thin skin as well if he's still holding a grudge.
Are you going to make me beg? You know I don't beg. You think I'm weak? Give that damn thing.
His power, which allows him to transform into a monstrous rhino-like creature, is tied to a serum administered by Dr. Miles Warren, a nod to Spider-Man lore that's never fully explored. What is important is that Alexei's ability creates a hardened shell that makes him practically impervious to damage, but it also causes him physical pain, adding a layer of tragedy to his character that the film never capitalizes on. The plot thickens, or rather becomes more convoluted, when Dmitri is kidnapped by Alexei's goons. Kraven then sets out to rescue him, leading to a chaotic chase through the city. So Kraven tracks down Calypso to help him locate the people on his kill list and those that took his brother. Why does he suddenly have a hit list? Why isn't his clearly despicable father Nikolai at the top of it? And why does rival gangster Alexei, who can transform into a literal rhino, need alliances to deal with his enemies when he could just bulldoze them?
I just like running through walls. I'm sorry? You see that wall? Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna run through it, and then when I run through that wall, you know what I'm gonna do? What are you gonna do? I'm gonna run through the other wall. Wow. You're probably thinking, Rhino, wouldn't you just turn around through the already pre-made hole in the wall? That's just not how I roll, Spider-Man.
And if he's so scared of being on Kraven's list, why does he kidnap his brother? Literally the only human he cares about. These are just a few of the countless whys that plague this film. So Calypso, who once saved Sergei's life, is now a lawyer seeking justice for a murdered colleague. How do we know she's a lawyer? Well, she tells us. Her character serves little purpose beyond providing occasional assistance to Kraven, and her backstory is barely touched upon. Even her supposed connection to voodoo, hinted at through a magical elixir she used to heal Kraven at the start, feels like a half-baked attempt to inject mysticism into the story. We're also introduced to the Foreigner, an assassin with a bizarre ability to hypnotize people. The Foreigner's powers are never explained, and his inclusion feels like an afterthought, adding another layer of confusion to an already convoluted and overstuffed plot. Nothing in Kraven the Hunter makes sense because the script utterly fails to establish even the most basic narrative cohesion. Character motivations are unclear, plot points are baffling, and the story is held together by clunky exposition dumps that are neither engaging nor logical.
When I hear it, I get like a little mad because I don't understand it, and I get a little irritated because I don't know what you're talking about.
Instead of compelling storytelling, the film relies on nonsensical action set pieces filled with jarring CGI and incomprehensible editing that often makes it difficult to figure out what's even happening. It's painfully obvious that many of these scenes were slapped together during reshoots, likely one of the many reasons the film's release was delayed by nearly 2 years. The result is a disjointed mess, where moments of supposed drama are frequently interrupted by ill-placed action sequences that feel like desperate attempts to inject life into an already lifeless story. The third act delivers a showdown between Kraven and Rhino's goons. Kraven actually gets some brutal kills in, but is bested by the Foreigner, who poisons him. But just before Kraven is killed, he's saved by Deus Ex Machina, aka Calypso, who, after doing an archery class as a kid, is now Hawkeye.
Legends don't die. Now get the up, Kraven.
Of course, she also revives Kraven using the magical elixir. Again, this is so fucking lazy. We then get the obligatory final fight between Kraven and the Rhino, set against the backdrop of a wildebeest stampede. When he fully transforms into Rhino from the comics, it marks the moment the already shaky visual effects take a nosedive. The transformation leads to yet another generic, weightless CGI brawl with no stakes or tension, rounding out an already disappointing spectacle.
The idea of gravity, like, affecting Kraven was something from very early on that we really wanted to design into the sequence. I had felt like from a lot of the comic book movies that I was starting to see over the last 10, 15 years, there was sort of just a complete loss of any sense of sort of gravity. The idea that when you throw something, it eventually will come down to Earth.
Kraven ultimately defeats Alexei by exploiting his only weak spot, but the victory feels more mechanical than earned. In a final twist, Kraven confronts Nikolai after discovering that his father orchestrated much of the chaos to manipulate his sons into serving his own ends. Kraven's revenge is oddly passive. He removes the bullets from his father's rifle and leaves him to be mauled by a bear. The film then ends with Dimitri revealing himself to be the Chameleon, a shapeshifter that's working with Dr. Warren, the person who basically created the Rhino. The brothers then part ways bitterly, and that's pretty much how the film closes.
Hey!
Who the f*** let this happen?
Ultimately, Kraven the Hunter is a film without a clear identity. The motivations of its protagonist are muddled, its villains are underdeveloped, and its plot is a jumbled series of events that fail to build meaningful tension or emotional resonance. The action is plentiful but repetitive, the performances are inconsistent, and the story feels like a patchwork of ideas with no unifying vision. It's a missed opportunity to explore the darker corners of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, instead delivering a forgettable entry into a franchise that lost its way long ago. One of Kraven the Hunter's biggest problems is that it's stuffed with plot yet utterly devoid of story. We never get a clear sense of why or how Sergei Kravenov transforms into an animal protector and a brutal criminal killer. Nor is there any explanation for how he travels the globe in what appears to be a chartered military airplane, complete with a mysterious pilot who has a voice and a back of a head but no real other presence. It's almost comical. This feels like the remnant of a cut subplot, possibly involving a named actor who got revoiced and edited out during the film's chaotic production process. This brings me to the film's second major issue. It's barely coherent on a basic filmmaking level. Director J.C. Shandor, known for quality work like Margin Call and The Most Violent Year, is clearly out of his element here. While the action sequences have their moments of visceral fun, they quickly become repetitive. Sergei's strategy rarely evolves beyond bloodily tearing through waves of faceless goons. And as with every other entry in Sony's Spider-Man Universe, the studio's obsession with reshoots and post-production tinkering has mangled whatever vision the original cut may have had. The editing in particular is a disaster. Moment-to-moment continuity is constantly broken. For example, midway through a dialogue scene, the film will suddenly cut to Aaron Taylor-Johnson or Ariana DeBose, filmed months later with clearly different hair, awkwardly delivering a line of ADR dialogue, only to cut back to the original footage. Scene-to-scene transitions fare no better, with most new scenes feeling completely disconnected from the ones preceding them. The result is a jarring, numbing experience as the audience is left scrambling to piece together why anything is happening in the order it's presented. Individually, some scenes work or at least function to move the plot forward, but the stakes never escalate on a personal level, and the characters show no meaningful growth. If anything, the more the movie progresses, the more it collapses under the weight of its own incoherence. By the end, it's not suspenseful or engaging, it's just confusing. What's most glaring is how painfully obvious the delays in reshoots are. If you thought Fan 4-Stick or Justice League were plagued by continuity errors, Kraven the Hunter might be the new gold standard for post-production chaos. The movie's seams are so visible, not even Spider-Man's webs could hold it together. Much of the dialogue is delivered off-screen via ADR or against glaringly artificial green screens, and in some scenes, the green screen isn't even keyed properly, leaving a faint green hue visible. It's amateurish in a way that shouldn't happen in a major studio production. Calypso, unfortunately, is the biggest casualty of this reshoot mess. She's supposedly a London lawyer, though her backstory is left murky at best and her scenes feel like afterthoughts. Several of her lines were clearly added in post-production to force an R rating, as though sprinkling in a few F-bombs was the magic fix for a deeply flawed film.
What's your profanity?
Right, I'm sorry.
Instead of enhancing her character, these last-minute changes only highlight the movie's lack of focus and cohesion. To me, Kraven the Hunter exemplifies everything wrong with the phrase, "we'll fix it in post-production."
The post department has been begging us to fix it in pre.
We'll fix it in post.
It's a Frankenstein's monster of reshoots, bad dubbing, and haphazard editing, stitched together into something that barely qualifies as a finished product. This isn't just a failure of storytelling, it's a failure of filmmaking itself. As I've already mentioned, Kraven the Hunter's much-hyped R rating feels like a last-minute attempt to salvage a film that didn't know what it wanted to be. Most of the bad language is awkwardly inserted through off-screen ADR, and the blood and gore effects are laughably fake, relying on CGI so unconvincing it feels like a video game cutscene. Sure, there's a brief and admittedly cool burst of violence in the final act, but it's hard to believe this movie was designed with an R rating in mind. It reeks of post-production, tweaking to fit a trend rather than a genuine creative decision. Speaking of CGI, the digital effects are some of the worst I've seen in a major studio release in years. The animals look like cartoon characters, completely devoid of realism, and even simple effects like gunshot wounds are so poorly rendered they feel like placeholders. You can't help but just wonder why they didn't just use basic practical effects. Anything would have been better than what's on display here. And then there are the performances. Let's just say they're as inconsistent as the rest of the movie, so at least that's consistent. Aaron Taylor-Johnson is serviceable as Kraven and does the standard stoic tough guy shtick, but his character could have been played by anyone. Russell Crowe, meanwhile, delivers a performance so phoned in he might as well have been sleepwalking. Christopher Abbott feels bizarrely out of place as a hypnotic assassin, as though he wandered in from a completely different film. But the standout, if you can call it that, is Alessandro Nivola as the Rhino. Through a half-baked Russian accent, Nivola transforms Rhino into a quietly unhinged psychopath whose every line delivery feels like a new exercise in absurdity.
I think there is an animal in each one of us, Dimitri.
The subpar ADR work only worsens the issue of performances. Characters often sound like their lines were recorded in a sound booth long after the cameras stopped rolling, with dialogue that's so crisp and out of sync with the environment it becomes unintentionally distracting. Multiple scenes feature characters speaking from a distance, their faces conveniently out of view, while their faces sound unnaturally close, an obvious attempt to paper over the cracks of an unfinished script, reducing the actors to dispassionate line readers who sound like they've just glanced at the script moments before, and the thing is, they practically did.
Even though it's all a little crazy when it all comes together, by the third act of the film, if we've done our job right, you know, even though some of it is sort of unbelievable in a weird way, you will believe it.
Shout the season,
The core problem with these Spider-Man without Spider-Man movies, Kraven included, is that these characters simply don't work without the web slinger.
I fought a alien black goo once.
Oh, no way. I fought an alien too.
I'm lame compared. Like, I fought a Russian guy in a rhinoceros machine.
Spider-Man is the linchpin that makes these villains compelling. Without him, they're reduced to uninteresting archetypes wandering through hollow narratives. Even Kraven, one of the more intriguing villains in Spider-Man's rogues gallery, owes much of his notoriety to Kraven's Last Hunt, a story that requires Spider-Man to function. Removing Peter Parker from the equation doesn't create intrigue, it just creates frustration. Sony's obsession with forcing stardom onto B and C-list characters only adds to the problem. Dimitri, for instance, the future chameleon and another classic Spider-Man villain, has his mimicry powers teased throughout the film with perfect impressions of other characters. Yet these abilities contribute absolutely nothing to the story.
Man should be the only animal that is dreaded.
It's a setup for a sequel that everyone knows will never happen. Instead of feeling like a meaningful tease, it's just another reminder of the franchise's aimlessness. And the most pressing question remains, who are these movies even for? Spider-Man fans will hate Kraven the Hunter because it has almost nothing in common with the comic book character. Casual audiences won't enjoy it either because the film's fundamental flaws, poor storytelling, inconsistent tone, and shoddy technical execution are impossible to ignore. With 5 critical failures in a row, Kraven the Hunter should have been Sony's last chance to right the ship. Instead, it's a worst hits compilation of the SSU's major flaws. the poorly conceived concept of Venom, the incoherent story of Morbius, and the baffling technical issues of Madam Web. Unlike Venom, which at least had a campy charm, or Morbius, which earned infamy for its meme-worthy absurdity, Kraven is just a boring, uninspired slog. It doesn't even have the decency to be entertainingly bad. It's just bad. It's a movie destined to make no impact at the box office or in the broader superhero genre, existing only as a footnote in cinema history while Sony figures out its next ill-fated attempt to milk the Spider-Man rights. It's poorly thought out, haphazardly executed, and utterly devoid of charm or coherence. While it tries to position Kraven as a gritty anti-hero, the result is more laughable than compelling, hampered by clunky storytelling and a script that stumbles from one cliché to the next. If this is truly the end of Sony's Spider-Man Universe, then perhaps it's a mercy. What's ironic is that in the comics, Kraven hunts and nearly kills Spider-Man, and this film most certainly killed Sony's Spider-Man Universe. What is certain is that it is most certainly not Kraven time.
Call me an asshole one more time.
Why, asshole?